The morning sun was barely touching the Montana wilderness when Jack heard the ravens. Their urgent, aggressive calls echoed through the pine forest in a pattern he had learned to recognize during his 15 years as a forest ranger. It meant death. It meant something wounded or dying lay somewhere in the thick underbrush ahead. He adjusted his backpack and quickened his pace along the narrow trail, his boots crunching through the frost-covered leaves. What he found in the small clearing would change everything he thought he knew about the boundaries between wild and tame, between predator and protector, between species that should never share the same den. The female bobcat lay motionless near the base of an old Douglas fir, her tawny fur matted with dried blood, her eyes open but seeing nothing. The coyote tracks around her told the story clearly. She had fought hard, probably defending something precious. Then Jack heard it, a tiny, desperate mewing sound coming from beneath a fallen log just 3 feet from her body. He dropped to his knees and peered into the shadowed space. 4 pairs of enormous blue eyes stared back at him from tiny, spotted faces no bigger than his fist. If you care about stories like this one, stories that remind us of the incredible bonds that exist in nature, please consider subscribing to Wild Heart Stories. Every subscription helps us share more of these extraordinary moments and strengthens our community dedicated to celebrating the beautiful, unexpected connections in the animal kingdom. Jack had seen many things in his career, but 4 bobcat kittens this young, this vulnerable, huddled together without their mother, hit something deep in his chest. They could not have been more than 3 or 4 weeks old. Their eyes were open and alert, their ears already pointed and expressive, but their movements were uncoordinated and weak. They had been without food for at least 12 hours, maybe longer. If he left them here, they would be dead by nightfall. The same coyotes that had killed their mother would return. The ravens overhead were already waiting. He carefully reached into the hollow and pulled out the first kitten. It hissed and swiped at him with claws no bigger than rose thorns, its tiny mouth open in a silent, threatening display that would have been terrifying if the creature was not so impossibly small. Jack wrapped it gently in his flannel shirt and reached for the second one. This one did not fight. It simply went limp in his hands, too exhausted or too shocked to protest. The third kitten tried to scramble deeper into the log, and the fourth one pressed itself against the wood like it could somehow become invisible. 20 minutes later, Jack had all 4 kittens secured in a makeshift nest inside his backpack, the top unzipped enough for air, but closed enough to keep them from climbing out. They mewed constantly during the 4-mile hike back to his ranch, their cries sounding eerily similar to domestic cat kittens, but with a wild, urgent edge that made his skin prickle. He kept one hand on the backpack, feeling their small bodies shifting and tumbling against each other as he walked. His ranch sat in a valley surrounded by dense forest on 3 sides, far enough from the main roads that he sometimes went days without seeing another human being. It was exactly the kind of isolated peace he had been seeking when he left his job in Missoula 5 years ago. The log cabin was small but comfortable, and the 10 acres of fenced property gave him space to breathe. More importantly, it was home to Ember. She was waiting on the porch when he climbed the steps, her black coat gleaming in the late morning sun, her tail wagging slowly as she watched him approach with curious brown eyes. Ember was a 4-year-old Labrador, pure black from nose to tail, with the gentle, patient temperament that made the breed such good family dogs. Jack had rescued her from a shelter 2 years ago, not long after she had lost her own litter of puppies to complications during birth. The vet had said she would never be able to have puppies again, and Jack had seen the sadness in her eyes. For months afterward, the way she would investigate baby animals on their walks with an intensity that broke his heart. He had no idea how she would react to bobcat kittens. Jack set the backpack down carefully on the porch and opened it wider. 4 small, spotted faces peered up at him, blinking in the bright light. Ember immediately came closer, her nose working overtime as she caught the scent of the kittens. Her entire body went still. The wagging stopped. Her ears came forward in sharp attention. The kittens saw her and reacted with instant fear. 3 of them tried to scramble backward in the confined space of the backpack. The 4th one, the smallest and most determined, stood on wobbly legs and hissed directly at Ember's massive black face. The dog's head was easily 4 times the size of the entire kitten. Ember did not growl or bark. She simply stared at the tiny creatures with an expression Jack had never seen before. It was confusion mixed with something that looked almost like recognition, like some ancient part of her brain was saying, "These are babies and babies need help," even as another part was saying, "But these are not my babies and they smell wrong." Jack carefully lifted the backpack and carried it inside, Ember following so closely she was practically stepping on his heels. He had already prepared a large cardboard box in the corner of his bedroom, lined with soft blankets and equipped with a heating pad set to low. He transferred the kittens one by one into this makeshift den, and they immediately huddled together in the far corner, 4 pairs of eyes watching his every move with a mixture of fear and desperate need. Ember stood at the edge of the box, her front paws up on the rim, staring down at them with that same confused intensity. Jack wondered if she could smell the death on them, the scent of their mother's blood still faint on their fur. He wondered if she understood on some level that these babies had lost everything, just like she had once lost everything. The first feeding was a disaster. Jack had called the local wildlife rehabilitation center from his truck on the way home, and they had walked him through the basics over the phone. Special kitten formula, warm but not hot, fed through a bottle or syringe every 3 to 4 hours. He mixed the formula according to the instructions and filled 4 small bottles he had bought from the veterinary supply store in town months ago for a completely different reason. The kittens wanted nothing to do with it. They hissed and spit and turned their heads away from the rubber nipples. They were old enough to be suspicious of anything that did not smell like their mother. They were also young enough that they did not yet understand what a bottle was or how to use it. Jack spent 45 minutes trying to get even a small amount of formula into the most cooperative kitten, before finally succeeding by holding its head gently and squeezing a few drops directly onto its tongue. The kitten swallowed reflexively, then seemed to realize what was happening and started sucking eagerly. By the time he had fed all 4 of them, his shirt was soaked with spilled formula, his hands were covered in tiny scratches, and he was exhausted. The kittens, finally full, immediately curled together in a tight pile and fell asleep. Jack sank into the chair beside the box and closed his eyes. That was when Ember made her move. Jack opened his eyes to find the big black dog carefully climbing into the box. She moved slowly, deliberately, like she was approaching something fragile and precious. The sleeping kittens did not wake immediately, too exhausted from their ordeal to notice the massive presence settling around them. Ember laid down in a careful curve, her body forming a warm, protective barrier around the pile of spotted babies. Then she began to lick them. It started with the smallest one, the fighter who had hissed at her on the porch. Ember's large pink tongue swept across the kitten's face and down its back in long, gentle strokes. The kitten stirred, made a small sound, then relaxed deeper into sleep. Ember moved to the next one, then the next, cleaning each of them with the same methodical care a mother bobcat would use. Jack watched in silence, afraid that any movement or sound from him would break whatever spell was happening in that cardboard box. The kittens smelled different after Ember was done with them. They smelled less like death and fear and wild things, and more like dog and safety and home. When Ember finally settled her head down on the edge of the blankets, the kittens instinctively pressed closer to her warmth. They did not know she was not their species. They only knew she was big and warm and smelled like milk and safety. Jack named them that first night while he watched Ember refuse to leave the box even for dinner. He brought her food to her, and she ate it quickly before returning her attention to the babies. Scout was the brave one, the first to explore, the one who had stood and hissed. Ash was the timid, grey-toned kitten who always hung back. Blaze was the troublemaker, already trying to climb the walls of the box. And Willow was the smallest, the one who seemed most interested in staying close to whatever warm body was nearest. The next 3 weeks established a routine that Jack had not thought possible. Every 4 hours, he fed the kittens with bottles. They grew better at it each time, learning to grab the nipple with their tiny paws and suck enthusiastically. Between feedings, Ember took over. She cleaned them constantly, her tongue working over every inch of their small bodies. She kept them warm when they slept, her large body curved around them like a black fortress. She even began responding to their cries, hurrying to the box whenever one of them mewed in distress. The kittens grew quickly. By the end of the first week, they were noticeably larger and more coordinated. Their eyes changed from blue to amber green. Their spots became more defined. They started trying to climb out of the box, their sharp little claws catching on the cardboard and blankets as they scrambled upward with determined expressions. Jack moved them to a larger enclosure in the living room, a 6-foot by 6-foot pen made of wire panels that gave them room to move but kept them contained. Ember spent most of her time lying in the pen with them. She had stopped trying to leave at all, unless Jack specifically called her for a walk or meal. Even then, she would hurry back as quickly as possible, her eyes anxious until she could see that the kittens were still safe. It was during the 3rd week that Jack started to notice Ember was not just caring for the kittens. She was teaching them. When Scout tried to bite her ears, she would gently pin him down with one large paw and hold him there until he stopped struggling and relaxed. When Blaze got too aggressive with the others, she would nudge him away with her nose and position her body between him and his siblings until he calmed down. When Willow cried for attention, Ember would immediately lower her head and let the tiny Bobcat clamber onto her face, purring loudly. The most surprising thing was how Ember seemed to understand their wild nature. She did not try to stop them from stalking each other, from pouncing and wrestling and biting in ways that would be too rough for puppy play. She let them sharpen their claws on the wooden posts Jack had added to the pen. She watched with calm acceptance when they began trying to climb the wire walls with their back legs, a distinctly feline skill that no dog would ever need or understand. One afternoon in the 4th week, Jack was working at his desk near the window when he saw movement outside. A large bird was circling lower and lower over the backyard where he had moved the pen for fresh air. He grabbed his binoculars. Golden Eagle, the massive raptor, was clearly interested in something on the ground. Jack ran outside just as the eagle began its dive. The kittens were playing in a patch of sunlight, completely unaware of the danger dropping toward them at 60 miles per hour. Ember was lying nearby, seemingly asleep. But the moment the eagle's shadow crossed the pen, the black dog exploded into action. She leapt to her feet with a bark that echoed off the surrounding hills and positioned her body directly over the 4 kittens. Her hackles raised, her teeth bared in a way Jack had never seen before. The eagle pulled out of its dive at the last possible second, its talons missing Ember's back by inches. It circled once more, then flew away into the forest. Jack stood frozen, his heart pounding. Ember remained standing over the kittens, her entire body tense and ready for another attack. The kittens huddled beneath her, their small faces pressed against her legs, their eyes wide with an instinctual fear of the sky. It took several minutes for Ember to relax, for her hackles to lower, for her breathing to return to normal. Only then did she carefully lie back down, and only then did the kittens venture out from beneath her protective stance. Jack realized something in that moment. This was not just about a dog taking care of orphaned animals. This was not just about maternal instinct or loneliness or any simple explanation. Ember had chosen these kittens as her own. She would protect them with her life. And somewhere in their small, wild hearts, the Bobcat kittens had chosen her right back. They trusted her completely. They sought her out for comfort and warmth and safety. They had accepted a massive black dog as their mother. As Jack watched Ember groom each kitten carefully, checking them for injuries that did not exist, reassuring herself that they were all still alive and safe, he wondered what would happen when they grew too big for her to protect. What would happen when their wild instincts grew stronger than their domesticated upbringing? What would happen when the time came to make an impossible choice between keeping them safe in captivity or setting them free in the wild where they belonged? But for now, in this moment, none of that mattered. All that mattered was the sight of 4 spotted kittens curled against the warm black body of their adoptive mother, purring loudly as she cleaned their faces with patient strokes of her tongue. All that mattered was the bond that had formed against every law of nature, the family that had been built from tragedy and loss and an unexpected willingness to love across species. The eagle did not return, but Jack moved the pen back inside anyway, just to be safe. Ember seemed grateful for the decision. She settled into the indoor pen with a deep sigh and let the kittens climb all over her like she was their personal jungle gym. Scout claimed the highest point, which happened to be the top of Ember's head. Ash pressed against her side. Blaze gnawed on her tail. And Willow, tiny, perfect Willow, curled up directly under Ember's chin and went to sleep with one small paw resting on the dog's nose. Jack took a photo, knowing no one would believe him if he just told them the story. By the time the kittens were 2 months old, they had transformed from helpless babies into small, efficient predators with personalities that could not have been more different from each other. Scout had grown into his role as the leader, always the first to investigate new sounds or objects, always testing boundaries that Jack and Ember tried to establish. His amber eyes had developed an intense, focused quality that reminded Jack of experienced hunters he had known. When Scout fixed his attention on something, whether it was a butterfly or a piece of string, or his own siblings, he committed completely to whatever came next. Ash remained the nervous one, but his timidity was beginning to look more like caution than fear. He watched everything from safe distances before deciding whether to participate. He was the smartest of the 4, the one who learned quickest from mistakes and avoided repeating them. While his brothers and sister would crash into the same obstacle repeatedly, Ash would find an alternative route after the first failed attempt. Ember seemed to understand this about him and never pushed him to be braver. She simply accepted his careful nature and was always there when he needed reassurance. Blaze lived up to his name. He was chaos in a spotted package. He climbed everything. He pounced on anything that moved and several things that did not. He had already knocked over 2 lamps, shredded 1 couch cushion, and somehow managed to get himself stuck in Jack's bookshelf 3 separate times. Ember spent more time correcting Blaze than all the others combined. She would grab him by the scruff and carry him away from whatever dangerous situation he had created, depositing him firmly on the ground with a stern look that said, "Stop this immediately." Blaze would sit there looking contrite for exactly 10 seconds before finding something new to destroy. And Willow, she was the surprise. Despite being the smallest, she had become the most confident with humans and the most attached to Ember. She followed the black dog everywhere, her small body practically glued to Ember's legs as they moved through the house. When Ember lay down, Willow would immediately claim the spot between her front paws or on top of her head. She purred almost constantly when near her adoptive mother, a sound so loud it seemed impossible to come from such a small body. Jack had recorded it once on his phone and played it back. It sounded like a tiny motorboat engine. The daily routine had evolved as the kittens grew. Jack still provided 4 meals a day, but the bottles had been replaced with shallow bowls of special formula mixed with softened kitten food. The Bobcats had taken to solid food with enthusiasm that bordered on violence. Mealtime was a full contact sport involving hissing, swatting, and strategic positioning that would put football players to shame. Ember would lie nearby and watch these feeding frenzies with a combination of amusement and mild disapproval, occasionally stepping in when things got too rough. After meals, Jack would take Ember and the kittens outside to the large fenced area behind the house. This was where things got interesting. Ember had spent years perfecting the art of being a domestic dog. She knew how to play fetch, how to sit and stay and come when called, how to walk politely on a leash, and how to differentiate between toys and non-toys. She tried very hard to teach these skills to her adopted children. The results were mixed at best. The first time Jack threw a tennis ball for Ember to fetch, all 4 kittens took off after it like their tails were on fire. Ember reached it first, of course, her longer legs giving her an insurmountable advantage. She picked up the ball gently in her mouth, turned around, and began trotting back to Jack like she had done thousands of times before. The kittens did not understand this part of the game. They thought Ember had caught prey and was keeping it for herself. They attacked her from all sides, climbing her legs, batting at the ball in her mouth, trying to steal this mysterious round object that apparently was very important. Ember stopped walking and looked at Jack with an expression that clearly said, "What exactly am I supposed to do with this situation?" Jack started laughing so hard he had to sit down in the grass. Ember eventually dropped the ball and let the kittens investigate it. They sniffed it, licked it, batted it around, and then promptly lost interest when they realized it did not smell like food or act like prey. Scout picked it up in his mouth and tried to carry it away like Ember had done, but the ball was too big for his small jaws. He dropped it, hissed at it for failing to cooperate, and stalked away with his tail high in the air. The attempts at teaching traditional dog tricks went no better. Jack would tell Ember to sit, and she would immediately drop her haunches to the ground, looking up at him expectantly for a treat. The kittens would watch this exchange with complete confusion. When Jack tried to get Scout to sit by gently pressing on his back end, the young Bobcat would either collapse flat on his belly like Jack was trying to murder him, or he would spring straight up in the air and land 3 feet away. Sitting on command was apparently not in the Bobcat instruction manual. Rolling over was even worse. Ember could roll over on command, spinning her entire body in a graceful rotation that earned her plenty of praise and treats. When Blaze tried to copy this, he got halfway through the roll, panicked when he found himself upside down and vulnerable, and launched himself sideways into a bush. He emerged covered in leaves and looking deeply offended. Ash refused to even attempt the roll after watching Blaze's disaster. Willow tried once, succeeded, and then never did it again because the position reminded her too much of the submission pose that more dominant animals would force on weaker ones. Scout tried to bite Jack's hand when the roll was suggested a second time. But there were some things the kittens could teach Ember, climbing, for instance. The Bobcats were natural climbers, their sharp claws and flexible bodies designed for scaling trees and rocks. They would race up the old oak tree at the edge of the property, their small forms flowing up the trunk like furry water. Ember would stand at the base and bark up at them, clearly wanting to join in, but lacking the equipment and physics to make it work. The kittens found this hilarious. They would peer down at her from high branches, their faces showing what looked suspiciously like amusement at her earthbound limitations. Scout figured out that he could get reactions from Ember by climbing to concerning heights. He would scale all the way to the thin upper branches that swayed dangerously in the wind, and Ember would pace below in obvious distress, whining and occasionally woofing as if to say, "Please come down before you die." Scout would wait until her anxiety reached peak levels and then leap down in a controlled fall, landing on a lower branch with perfect precision before scrambling the rest of the way down. Ember would immediately tackle him and groom him aggressively, as if washing away the terror he had just put her through. The kittens also introduced Ember to the concept of stalking as entertainment. For Bobcats, stalking was not just about hunting. It was play, practice, and apparently comedy. They would hide behind furniture in tall grass, under bushes, and wait for Ember to walk past. Then they would launch themselves at her legs, her tail, or sometimes her face, their small bodies flying through the air with impressive accuracy. Ember began to develop an almost supernatural sense for these attacks. She would pause mid-step, turn her head to look directly at the patch of grass where Ash was hiding and simply stare at him until he sheepishly emerged and tried to pretend he had not been planning an ambush. But sometimes she would pretend she did not notice and let them succeed in their attacks. She would walk past a hiding spot, and Blaze would explode out and grab her tail with all 4 sets of claws. Ember would yelp dramatically, spin around as if genuinely surprised, and then gently chase him in circles until he collapsed in exhausted laughter. Because yes, the Bobcats laughed. It was not exactly laughter in the human sense, but it was a distinctive chirping sound they made when they were playing and happy and felt completely safe. Ember had learned to recognize this sound and seemed to live for it. Jack documented everything. He took dozens of photos and videos every day, knowing that these moments were temporary and precious. He shared some of them online, and they went viral almost immediately. People could not believe what they were seeing. A black Labrador raising wild bobcats. The comments ranged from heartwarming to skeptical to concerned. Some people accused him of keeping dangerous wild animals illegally. Others said he was doing important rescue work. A few suggested he was faking the whole thing with digital effects or trained animals. Jack stopped reading the comments after a while. He knew what was real. He knew what was happening in his home and on his property. He knew that Ember had formed a genuine bond with these kittens and that they had formed one right back. He also knew that this situation could not last forever. The conversation with the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center became more frequent. They had been monitoring the kittens' progress since the beginning, and by the 3rd month, they began asking questions about timeline. How big were the kittens now? How strong were their wild instincts? How much of their natural hunting behavior was emerging? When did Jack plan to transition them to a more appropriate long-term facility? Jack did not have good answers. He knew the right thing to do was to start preparing for their eventual move to a specialized wildlife center, where they could be with their own kind, where they could live in large outdoor enclosures that mimicked their natural habitat. He knew that keeping them long-term was neither fair to them nor legal in any meaningful way. He knew all of this intellectually, but emotionally, the thought of separating this little family made him feel sick. Ember seemed to sense that something was changing. Dogs were incredibly perceptive about human emotions, and Jack was not good at hiding his stress. She began staying even closer to the kittens, as if her physical presence could somehow prevent whatever future she could not quite understand, but definitely felt approaching. When Jack made phone calls about transition plans, Ember would lie with all 4 kittens pressed against her body, her eyes watching him with an expression that clearly communicated, "Please do not take them away from me." The kittens themselves were blissfully unaware of any looming changes. They were busy discovering the world and their place in it. By 3 months old, they had started exhibiting behaviors that reminded Jack constantly of their wild nature. They hunted real prey now, catching mice and small birds with efficiency that was both impressive and slightly disturbing. They could kill with a quick bite to the neck, the technique apparently hardwired into their genetics, despite never having been taught by their biological mother. Ember watched these hunts with an expression Jack could not quite read. It was not disgust or fear. It was more like realization. She was beginning to understand that these babies she had been caring for were not dogs and never would be dogs. They were predators, hunters, wild things that belonged in forests and mountains, not in living rooms and fenced yards. But understanding this did not make her love them any less. If anything, she seemed to become more protective, as if she knew their differences made them vulnerable in a domestic world. There was one evening that Jack would never forget. He was sitting on the back porch as the sun set behind the mountains, watching Ember and the kittens in the yard. The kittens were practicing their stalking skills on each other, taking turns being predator and prey. Ember lay in her favorite spot under the oak tree, her black coat almost invisible in the growing shadows. Suddenly, all 4 kittens stopped playing and looked up at the sky. Their ears went flat, their bodies lowered into defensive crouches. They had spotted a hawk circling overhead. Ember lifted her head and followed their gaze. She saw the bird. She looked back at the kittens, noting their instinctual fear response. And then she did something extraordinary. She stood up, walked to the middle of the yard, positioned herself directly beneath the flight path of the hawk, and stood there as a living shield. She was big enough and dark enough that the hawk could see her clearly. She was obviously not prey, obviously a threat to anything that might think about diving toward the smaller animals nearby. The hawk circled twice more and then flew away. The kittens slowly relaxed. One by one, they approached Ember and rubbed against her legs, their version of saying, "Thank you," or maybe "We are safe with you." Ember lowered her head and nuzzled each of them in return. It was a perfect moment of interspecies understanding, of family protecting family, of love that transcended the boundaries nature had supposedly set in stone. Jack felt tears on his face and did not bother wiping them away. How could he separate them? How could he take these kittens away from the only mother they had ever known and send them to a place where Ember could not follow? How could he explain to a dog that her children needed to leave? How could he explain to wild animals that their safe, warm, perfect world was about to change in ways they could not possibly understand? But he also knew what would happen if he kept them. They would grow bigger and stronger. Their hunting instincts would intensify. They might hurt Ember accidentally with claws meant for prey. They might hurt each other. They would never be truly happy in captivity, never fulfill their potential as wild bobcats. Keeping them would be selfish, a choice that benefited Jack and Ember but harmed the kittens themselves. That night, Jack made the call. He scheduled the transition for 3 weeks out. The Wildlife Center had space opening up in their bobcat enclosure, a large outdoor habitat with trees and water features and plenty of room for 4 growing juveniles. They would be wild again, or as wild as hand-raised bobcats could be. They would eventually be released into protected territory if they developed the necessary survival skills. It was the right choice. The only choice. But it felt like his heart was being torn out of his chest. He did not tell Ember, how could he? But somehow she knew anyway. That night, she refused to come inside even when the temperature dropped below freezing. She stayed in the outdoor enclosure with the kittens, her body curved around all 4 of them, keeping them warm with her heat, keeping them close with her presence. Jack brought blankets and left them there. He watched from the window as Scout climbed onto Ember's back and fell asleep with his small head resting on hers. As Ash pressed against her belly and purred softly, as Blaze gnawed gently on her ear and finally gave up when she would not react, as Willow burrowed under her chin and became almost invisible against the black fur. 3 weeks. They had 3 more weeks before everything changed. Jack went to bed but did not sleep. He lay there in the dark and thought about bonds that should not exist, but did anyway. About love that ignored species and logic and natural law. About a black dog who had lost her own children and found new ones in the most unlikely place. About 4 wild bobcats who should fear dogs, but instead saw one as their entire world. Outside, under the stars, Ember held her family close and tried to make the night last forever. The last 3 weeks passed both too quickly and too slowly. Jack found himself memorizing small moments, storing them away like photographs in his mind. The way Scout would greet him every morning by headbutting his leg hard enough to bruise. The way Ash would finally relax into petting after exactly 17 seconds of cautious evaluation. The way Blaze would steal Ember's toys and hide them in increasingly creative locations. The way Willow would curl up in Jack's lap during evening reading time and purr so loudly he could barely hear his audiobook. But mostly, he memorized Ember. The way she would count her kittens with her eyes every few minutes, making sure all 4 were still safe and visible. The way she had learned to play differently with each one, matching their personalities and needs. The way she would groom them every night in the same order, always starting with Scout, because he had the most patience, and ending with Blaze because he had the least. The way she slept, curved around them like a fortress made of fur and loyalty and impossible love. Jack tried to prepare her, even though he knew it was futile. He began taking her on longer walks away from the kittens, forcing separations that grew gradually longer. Ember tolerated these walks but never enjoyed them. She would constantly look back toward the house, her ears alert for any sound that might indicate trouble. When they returned, she would rush immediately to check on the kittens, inspecting each one thoroughly, as if Jack had been gone for days instead of an hour. The kittens were growing at an incredible rate. At 4 months old, they were already half the size of Ember. Their legs long and muscular, their bodies lean and powerful. Their spotted coats had developed the rich, beautiful patterns of adult bobcats, each one unique and striking. Scout's markings were bold and dramatic. Ash's was softer, more subtle. Blaze had unusual rosettes on his shoulders that almost looked like flames. Willow's spots were small and perfectly round, like someone had painted them on with a careful brush. They no longer looked like babies. They looked like what they were: young wild predators capable of serious damage if they chose to use their strength. Jack had seen them practicing their hunting techniques on fallen logs, their claws extending and retracting as they simulated the killing bite. He had watched them take down prey that was nearly their own size. They were becoming what nature intended, and it was both beautiful and terrifying. The Wildlife Center representatives came to visit a week before the scheduled transfer. They needed to assess the kittens, make sure they were healthy and ready for the transition. 2 women arrived in a truck marked with the center's logo, carrying clipboards and cameras and an air of professional competence. Jack led them to the outdoor enclosure where Ember and the kittens spent most of their time now. The moment the strangers entered the property, all 4 bobcats vanished into hiding spots they had prepared for exactly this kind of situation. Ember stood in front of their favorite den box, her hackles slightly raised, her eyes wary. She knew these people were here for her babies. She knew it with the same certainty that let her predict storms before they arrived and earthquakes before they struck. The assessment took over an hour. The women had to coax each kitten out individually, check their weight and condition, observe their behavior. Scout was suspicious but cooperative. Ash refused to come out until Ember went over and gently dragged him out by the scruff. Blaze tried to bite one of the women and earned a stern correction from Ember that made Jack laugh despite the tension. Willow clung to Ember's neck and had to be carefully pried off while making sounds of distress that broke everyone's hearts. The verdict was positive. The kittens were healthy, well socialized to humans, but still appropriately wild. They had retained enough natural instinct that the center was confident they could eventually be released. They would spend 6 months to a year in the large outdoor habitat, learning to hunt live prey, to avoid humans, to be fully independent bobcats. Then, if all went well, they would be released into protected wilderness area where they could live as nature intended. It was everything Jack had hoped for and everything he had dreaded. After the women left, he sat on the porch and watched Ember gather her kittens back together, grooming each one thoroughly, as if washing away the stranger smell. The kittens pressed against her, seeking reassurance, and she gave it freely. Jack wondered if this was what it felt like to send a child off to college. This terrible mixture of pride and grief, knowing you were doing the right thing while simultaneously wanting to stop time and keep them small and safe forever. The night before the transfer, Jack barely slept. He could hear Ember moving around the house, checking on the kittens repeatedly. Around 3 in the morning, he got up and went to the living room. Ember was lying in the middle of the floor, with all 4 kittens piled on top of her in a heap of black and spotted fur. Her eyes were open, reflecting the moonlight coming through the windows. She looked at Jack with an expression so human in its sadness that he had to look away. He sat down next to her and put his hand on her head. She leaned into the touch, but did not take her eyes off the kittens. Jack whispered things to her that probably made no sense, but felt necessary to say. He told her she had been the best mother these babies could have asked for. He told her she had saved their lives and given them a chance at a future. He told her it was okay to be sad, that he was sad too, that goodbyes were supposed to hurt when they mattered this much. Ember licked his hand once, then returned her attention to her sleeping children. Jack stayed there with her until the sun came up, watching the last night of their impossible family together. The transfer team arrived at 10 in the morning. They brought specialized crates, 4 of them, each one designed for safe transport of wild felines. The crates were larger than Jack had expected, with solid sides and ventilation holes and secure latches. They looked like tiny prison cells. Getting the kittens into the crates was harder than anyone anticipated. Scout went first, lured in with his favorite toy and a trail of treats. He walked into the crate confidently and only realized what was happening when the door closed behind him. His yowl of betrayal echoed through the property. Ember immediately rushed to the crate and stuck her nose against the ventilation holes, whining. Ash took 20 minutes of careful coaxing. Blaze had to be scruffed and carried in while he fought every step of the way. Willow was worst of all. She clung to Ember with all 4 sets of claws, screaming, her eyes wide with terror. Jack had to physically pry her off, while Ember watched with a look of absolute devastation. When Willow was finally secured in her crate, she pressed herself against the side closest to Ember and cried with a sound Jack had never heard from her before. It was pure despair. The 4 crates were loaded into the truck. Ember tried to climb in after them. Jack had to hold her back, his arms wrapped around her chest, her entire body straining toward the truck where her babies were crying for her. She did not understand. She could hear them calling for her, and she could not reach them. Her confusion and grief manifested in sounds that Jack would hear in his nightmares for months afterward. The truck pulled away down the long driveway. Ember broke free from Jack's grip and ran after it, barking frantically. She chased the truck all the way to the main road, running as fast as her legs would carry her, refusing to give up even when the truck was long gone and only dust remained. Jack followed in his own truck, calling her name, but she would not stop. She ran until she physically could not run anymore, until her legs gave out and she collapsed on the side of the road, panting and whining and searching the empty distance for children who were no longer there. Jack carried her back to the truck. She was too exhausted to resist. He drove home in silence, while Ember lay in the passenger seat and stared out the window with the most heartbroken expression he had ever seen on any creature. When they got home, she went immediately to the empty enclosure and began searching for the kittens. She checked every hiding spot, every corner, every place they used to sleep. She sniffed the blankets they had used and made sounds of distress when she could not find them. For 3 days, Ember barely ate. She would not play. She refused her walks. She spent all her time in the enclosure, lying in the spot where the kittens used to sleep, occasionally lifting her head to scan the property as if they might suddenly reappear. Jack sat with her for hours, just being present, letting her grieve in whatever way she needed. He understood that for Ember, this was not just sadness. This was loss as real and deep as any biological parent would feel. Slowly, over the following weeks, Ember began to return to herself. She started eating normally again. She accepted her walks, though she still checked the empty enclosure every day. Jack got updates from the wildlife center regularly. The kittens were adjusting well. They were learning to hunt live prey. They were bonding with other bobcats in adjacent enclosures. They were becoming wild again. It was exactly what was supposed to happen, and it hurt anyway. 5 months passed. It was early spring, and the Montana wilderness was waking up from winter. Jack got a call from the wildlife center. The kittens were ready for their final phase before release. They were going to be moved to a large, semi-wild enclosure where they could roam freely and learn final survival skills. The center was hosting a volunteer day where people who had helped with rescues could visit and see the animals they had saved. Jack was invited. He could bring Ember if he wanted, though they could not guarantee any interaction. The Bobcats were nearly wild now. They might not remember. Jack made the decision immediately. He had to take Ember. She deserved closure, even if it brought more pain. Even if the kittens did not recognize her. She needed to see that they were alive and healthy and living the lives they were meant to live. He packed the truck early on the chosen Saturday morning. Ember sensed that this trip was different and climbed into the passenger seat with more enthusiasm than she had shown for anything in months. The drive took 2 hours. The wildlife center was built into the forest, with large natural enclosures that mimicked wild habitat as closely as possible. Jack checked in at the main building and explained who he was. The staff recognized Ember immediately. Everyone at the center knew the story of the black dog who had raised Bobcat kittens. It had become something of a legend among wildlife rehabilitation communities. They were escorted to the Bobcat enclosure by a guide named Rachel, who had worked directly with the 4 kittens. She warned Jack again that the Bobcats might not acknowledge them. They had been deliberately distanced from human contact over the past 5 months. They were wild animals now, and wild animals did not have relationships with dogs or people. Jack nodded and tried to prepare himself for disappointment. Ember seemed to understand nothing except that they were going somewhere important. Her tail wagged slowly as they walked down the forest path. The enclosure was massive, at least 3 acres of natural forest surrounded by high fences. Rachel led them to a viewing platform that overlooked a clearing where the Bobcats often appeared during feeding time. It was almost noon. The staff would be putting out food soon. They waited in silence. Ember stood at the railing, her nose working overtime, her entire body tense with attention. Jack watched her, wondering what she was sensing, what she remembered. Then he saw movement in the trees. 4 shapes emerged from the forest, moving with the fluid grace of wild cats. They were huge now, fully grown bobcats with powerful bodies and confident strides. Jack could barely recognize them, but Ember did. The moment she saw them, her entire body began to shake. She made a sound Jack had never heard before, a whine mixed with a bark, mixed with something that sounded almost like crying. She pressed against the railing, her tail wagging so hard her whole back end was moving. The 4 bobcats stopped at the edge of the clearing. Their ears came forward. Their heads turned in unison toward the viewing platform. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then Scout, because it had to be Scout, took 3 steps forward. He stared directly at Ember. His mouth opened slightly, and then he ran. He sprinted across the clearing toward the platform with Ash and Blaze and Willow right behind him. They reached the fence below the platform and began climbing, their claws catching on the chain link, their voices crying out in sounds of recognition and joy. They climbed as high as they could, pressing their faces against the fence, reaching with their paws, trying to get to Ember. Ember was beside herself. She barked and whined and tried to climb down to them. Rachel was crying. Jack was crying. The Bobcats were calling with voices that sounded exactly like they had as kittens, that desperate mewing that meant we need you and we missed you and please come back. It was impossible. It was not supposed to happen. Wild animals did not remember, but these 4 did. These 4 knew exactly who Ember was. Rachel made a decision that probably violated multiple protocols. She led Jack and Ember down to ground level and opened a secure gate that allowed them into a buffer zone between the enclosure and the public area. She did not let them into the main enclosure, but she got them close enough. Close enough that when Ember pressed her face against the fence, the 4 bobcats could reach through with their paws and touch her. Close enough that they could smell each other, hear each other, see each other clearly. The reunion lasted 20 minutes. Scout rubbed his face against the fence where Ember's face was on the other side. Ash pressed his whole body against the chain link and purred so loudly Jack could hear it from 10 feet away. Blaze tried to climb through a gap that was far too small, got stuck, and had to be helped out by Rachel while everyone laughed through their tears. Willow laid down right at the fence line and reached both paws through to touch Ember's paws, and they stayed like that for a long time, just touching, just being together in the only way the fence would allow. Ember tried to groom them through the fence. She licked every part she could reach. The bobcats leaned into her touch like they were kittens again, seeking the comfort they remembered. But they did not try to escape. They did not cry to be let out. They were wild now, but they were also still hers, still remembered, still loved. It was enough. When it was time to leave, Ember did not fight. She touched each bobcat one more time through the fence, a gentle nose-to-nose contact that looked like a promise, or maybe a blessing. Then she turned and walked back to Jack with her head high. She looked back once, saw all 4 of them watching her, and then continued on. On the drive home, Ember slept in the passenger seat with something that looked like peace on her face. Jack thought about the impossibility of it all. A wild mother's death leading to a domestic dog's purpose. 4 species incorrect babies becoming a real family. A goodbye that felt like death becoming a hello that felt like resurrection. Wild animals remembering love that should have been forgotten. 6 months later, all 4 bobcats were released into protected wilderness. Rachel called to give Jack the news. They had been fitted with tracking collars and would be monitored, but they were free now, fully wild, living the lives their birth mother had intended for them before tragedy struck. Scout had already established a territory. Ash was thriving near a river system. Blaze had gotten into trouble with a porcupine but was fine. Willow had been spotted with a mate. Jack told Ember the news, knowing she could not understand the words but might understand the tone. She wagged her tail and leaned against his leg. She still checked the empty enclosure sometimes, still carried their old toys around occasionally, still had moments where she would stop and stare toward the forest, as if listening for voices only she could hear. But she was happy again. She had done what mothers do. She had loved fiercely, protected completely, and let go when letting go was love. In a world that insisted on boundaries and categories and proper order, a black dog and 4 spotted kittens had created their own truth. They had proven that family is not always about biology, that love does not require matching species, that the bonds we choose can be just as powerful as the bonds we are born into, and that sometimes the most natural thing in the world is the thing nature never planned at all.